I have a real passion for business, for innovation, for creating new things, for evolving through life cycles of different things that we do. And it was a job at the city that I took back in 1981 that I realized that I wanted to be on the private sector side. And it was because I think most about the creativity that's afforded to being a entrepreneur, a business owner. Certainly there's some great challenges that go along with this side, but there's also some great rewards. And BH has been a wonderful place for me. I've really thrived there. The engineering that we've gotten to do has been great, and as was noted, not a lot of people realize that the company has a surveying, engineering, and a mapping component to it. And because of that integrated model, we are highly steeped on the technology side, and we have to compete with an evolving platform that seems to change every other day when it comes to data acquisition, data management. How do you make yourself more efficient as things move forward? So I feel like, although my background is on the engineering side, I feel like as a leadership team we've been pretty effective in moving the company forward with technology, and Larry Houston of Bohannon Houston is credited for that because Larry saw the benefits of technology. So we've been there for decades now, and in fact I've been in the mapping business for about 4 decades and have seen many changes. So that's a little bit about BH, and let me again say that I applaud your efforts. It's really incredible to think about what you're going to do, and it's exciting to be a part of Verge and ABQID now, and I'm just really excited for all of you. So this is, you're catching me at an evolving moment in my presentation career. I've done a lot of talks. I've been to the university many times talking to engineering classes, and have been involved with a lot of water presentations, and this is now the 3rd presentation where I've challenged myself to download my thoughts on 2 sides of an 11 by 17, and it's pretty compelling when you try and take information and make it graphic and informative and complete, and so I'm not sure that I'm where I want to be at this stage, but this is a new format for me, so I hope it's effective. Let me also say that when it comes to ethics, I can stand up here and make it sound like I've really got this figured out. That everything that I've done has been top shelf, no real issues, everything's gone fine, and I just want to be real candid with you that what I'm going to share today comes with some challenges and struggles and some poor decisions and some regrets along the way, things that I would have done over probably looking back. So I'll be sharing some things, but I don't want to make it, I don't want you to feel like I figured this out and that everything through my career has just gone extremely well. There's been a lot of lessons learned. So let's go through this and try and walk you through the sections. Before I talk about what the gray band is, as it relates to ethics, you've got 2 columns there about BH and about myself, and you can look at those details. The company is 55 years old. We just had our 55th anniversary, and I like to say that we're a young company because if we ever think that we figured it out and can rely on our past and our history, we're in trouble. So we try and stay current and modern. You can kind of see our ranking. It's interesting that a company our size is still in that 1% of engineering firms in the United States, both architects and engineers. So that gives you some context to our profession. And if you drive north on I-25, you've probably commented about our design at Paseo and I-25. We're excited to see that done, but that's the kind of work we do. We've on the engineering side, it's big infrastructure projects. Some of the subdivisions that we've worked on are there. You may even live in some of those places. And then our values, which I'll kind of keep referring back to. And then you can see some things about myself and my career. What's really been terrific is the company's given me the opportunity to participate in many different leadership levels, invest back in the community, and that's afforded me some just great friendships and opportunities to help Albuquerque improve and grow and do better. And I like to get involved. I like to participate in making organizations better, and have had the opportunity to lead in many different ways. So that's been terrific. Let me give you kind of a broad overview of the gray band and where I'm going with the presentation. The band of ethics, if you want to think of it that way, a big swoosh, okay, goes from two extremes, from one extreme to the other. And then there's this big middle piece. And we're going to talk about the big middle piece today. The one extreme, the dark side, are those ethics stories, and I'll refer to a couple in a minute, that captivate the public's mindset. They're quite dramatic. They're hard to imagine. They're hard to imagine being in that situation, and it's certainly a place that we don't want to be. We don't want to be on that end of the ethics spectrum. Those dark places where things have just really unraveled and are just you just can't really comprehend how it happened. How somebody or a group of people got themselves into that situation. So it's the part that we want to stay away, and for most of us, maybe all of us, we won't be on that side of the ethics spectrum, and that's the hope. The other side is what is kind of this sunset view of life, that everything is just going to go by perfectly. I'm not going to be challenged with dilemmas. I'm not going to be put out there where I've got to make some courageous decisions. I am challenged by other people's views, whether they're right or wrong. Everything is just wonderful. That side of the spectrum, that end does not exist, in my opinion. Okay, because you know that already in your life you've had to make many decisions about what's right and wrong, how you apply it to your work, and now that you're starting off in a business context, maybe for some of you for the first time, you're going to be presented with hundreds and probably thousands of different things that challenge your morals and your ethics framework. So the dark side, we hope we don't end up in. The sitting on the beach, viewing the sunset every day doesn't exist. And we play in this gray band, okay? And let me start off with some definitions. First of all, morals relate to right or wrong conduct. We sometimes get these terms mixed up. We interchange them. By definition, if you look them up, morals has to do with right or wrong conduct. Okay? Ethics is a system of moral principles. Okay? So the bottom line, I think, for any leader that's trying to understand how to be effective in their leadership, and I think that's what we all want to do. We all want to be effective in what we do. We need to decide what is right and wrong. And then we have to systematize them in a framework, an ethics framework. And there's two parts to that: deciding and then putting them into the framework. And I'm afraid that when it comes to ethics, and this is kind of one of my trends on the right-hand side, is that I think we get the dramatic cases dominate, and we end up going, phew, I'm not there. I'd never do that. That can never happen to me. And we ignore the gray band. We ignore this piece that is really where we live our lives and carry out our leadership. So, a couple of observations to start off. Ethics, in my opinion, really matters in your leadership. Okay, it really matters. It's not a topic to say, yeah, I heard a few presentations on it, took a class, and now I'm through with it. It's a daily evolving discussion that is very important. Leadership pressures are enormous. Okay? I use that word strategically. They're enormous. That this is not low-level stuff, what you're doing. And for those of you who have been there, and maybe for a long period of time, you understand what I mean. You're venturing into something that is very challenging. And again, I don't want to talk negatively in a sense, because there's a lot of great things that come out of owning a business and doing what you're doing. But the pressures on you as a leader in your role as you go forth are significant. And I think you can end up underestimating them, ignoring them, saying everything's going to be fine, and really they're a heavy constant in a lot of respects. I believe addressing the subject requires intentionality, and repeating what I said, I don't think you can go from a few conversations and stay with this discussion in a thoughtful way. I think you have to be very intentional about your definition of what's right and wrong, and then the establishment of your ethics framework. And you can decide what intentionality means. You'll have to decide, but I think there's got to be some structure and focus to it over the long haul, or else what's going to happen is that you find, and I've been there any number of times, things start to kind of slip, and you kind of have to reconnect and set and decide how you're going to do things. And it requires that constant drumbeat. As a leader, you are watched much more than you think. And what I mean here is that if take seriously, and I know you do, your leadership position, and you think people around you, your coworkers, staff, partners, peers, that they watch you at a certain level, I'll contend that they're watching at a much higher level. And that if you don't take that seriously, what happens is you discount your leadership role, you discount the significance of the role, you back off the conversations, you say it doesn't matter, and you're in a place that can be dangerous at times. And so I had this experience actually when I was in school, in just across the street at UNM. Dr. May, who was a mentor of mine and went on to be the president of the university, one day, and it's funny what your mind remembers, but I remember the conversation in the hall, and he was telling a few of us some pretty intimate details about ourselves. And I'm sitting there afterwards going, how did he know all that? I didn't tell him. And so I went back and I asked him how he knew. And his answer was along the lines, this is not the exact quote probably, but he says, we talk about you way more than you think. And this was a professor-student relationship, and it's been translated many times over in the workplace from a leader perspective. just don't underestimate what people are talking about, how they view you, how they view your actions, your words. Everything that you do is much more pronounced than you think. The last thing, time travels quickly. You know, here I am talking about 32 years at BH. I do remember a couple of the first days at the company. I remember doing my orientation. I remember who I met at the Xerox machine on that second day. And here I am 32 years later, and it's just been a whirlwind. And the reason why I share that is that if you think that at some point you're going to put off this issue of thinking about ethics or your conduct and so forth, and I'll get to it, you'll be standing up 30 years later talking about your career and wondering where it went. And maybe that's a little bit too much like a father's advice, but and we've all heard it. And so, but I think for me, it's actually been a much quicker path than I ever realized. So some quick observations as it relates to leadership and the tie to ethics. Some trends that are happening as it relates to ethical conduct in the workplace. Some recent surveys, and you can look at this different ways, and there's probably different rankings, but trust is top of mind with employees right now. They'll put trusting the leadership, the direction of the leadership team ahead of other things that you might consider important. And so, again, that kind of goes back to your leadership as being significant. People right now, more so than maybe in the past, are looking to trust you and what you do and how you handle your work. Unethical exposure is explosive right now, okay? And it's all because of technology. It's all because of stuff that people have done to really know a lot about all of us. Again, probably more than we think. Conduct that's inappropriate has, in my opinion, little chance of staying sequestered. Whereas before, you could kind of count on the fact that not a lot of people knew. Now, and I think the significance of the transgressions are proportional to how fast it goes and how broadly it goes, but it's explosive. And so, in some respects, you would think that maybe this concern that it can go public in a lot of different ways would make people think twice about what they do. I don't know how you correlate that or actually draw that conclusion, but it's interesting to think about. Ethics is becoming more of a fabric topic, and what I mean there is it's woven into academia and business in kind of a fabric way. You know, I took an ethics class at UNM, as opposed to just going into a class and saying yes, we're going to talk about ethics, and then you walk out the door and that's the last time maybe you think about it. But this comes with a caution, okay? I think it's great to integrate ethics ideas and challenges within the broad context of a business. But it takes a lot of work to do that well. And when you take the light off, like in an ethics class or something focused on the topic, you've got to really convince yourself and prove out that you are good at integrating broad themes and ideas that are important. Going system with ideas and strategies is a challenge, okay? And that's why it's not done all that much in some respect, is that it's so daunting that people will kind of piecemeal it, and they'll look at things like an ethics class at the civil engineering department, or they'll have an ethics program at work, or they'll have an ethics statement. All of those are good. We'll talk about accountability in a minute, but my point here is that it's easy to say, yeah, I've taken the light off. We're not gonna just have a single focus. We're going to be highly integrated, and we're going to talk about it all the time, and it's going to be all through the company. And it's a challenge. You've got to prove that out with your systems and what results you're getting and how often you're actually doing it. Yes?
I came in a little bit late, so I'm not sure if it's okay to ask.
Sure.
Questions.
Jump right in.
And thank you for coming. I think it's kind of almost in now to go to ethics classes and talk about ethics, but I don't know, anecdotally it seems like it's not having a tremendous effect. So it sort of seems like one step, maybe step B or step C would be, I've decided to implement it as a leader or as an individual, and how do I go do that? But how do people really change? I mean, how does the great unwashed mass really decide I'm going to do more right than wrong, and that as a leader, in this case, it's actually valuable? I mean, there's an ROI on doing it as opposed to it's just quote unquote the right thing to do. Because it seems like when I talk to people that teach and consult on leadership, I say, well, what do you do if you're talking to a leader that doesn't really get it? And they say, well, I just move on to the next one. Because if they don't get it, they don't get it.
Well, you've brought up some terrific points in what you just said, and I don't know that I have the answers that are comprehensive. What I can say, though, is that my belief is that not everybody understands what is right and wrong to begin with. And certainly within an organization, you have a tremendous impact on the culture and the nature of what is going to be right and wrong. And the only way to convey that, the only way to deal with it from my perspective, is to shine a light on it, maybe with a program or a class, and then put some intentionality to how it's integrated into the company. You have got to decide at what level, how far you take this. In fact, we're going to look at some questions in a minute that you've got to decide. Each one of you has got to walk away from here, in my opinion, and decide at what level are you going to deal with morals and ethics. And the answer is different. I mean, none of you will do it the same. And you've got to personalize it. And so I guess from the perspective that I don't think that everybody within an organization totally understands right and wrong in the context of what the organization is trying to do. You've got to be a communicator. You've got to sit down and explain. You've got to correct. You've got to be a role model because everybody's watching you. So there's a huge fabric of things that have to happen here to do it effectively. And the challenge is to step back and say, okay, this is important. How am I going to apply this to my company and to my conduct? Yeah, Andrew.
So most companies that I've worked for anyway, they have imbued this culture of moral, the fabric or system of morals and principles to their corporate values lecture or during the orientation week. Say, if you stick to and you become an ideal corporate citizen, that's what you would represent in terms of you don't break any the morals that the company represents. If you stick to the values. But I see the conflict comes where, at the end of the day, a for-profit company has to make money, provide value to the shareholders, or increase over time. And what kind of boundaries do you cross to do that, including your corporate values, and what is your corporate social responsibility, is something that I think overlooked in the interest of quote-unquote making money. And there are some big-name companies that have done that in terms of causing world economic crisis and things like that. So, not to mention, consulting companies that have died, etc. So, how does this all factor into the corporate social responsibility?
Well, both of you said that very well in terms of what happens, and then also the challenge to personalize this and try and come to grips from your perspective. Let's turn the paper over, and maybe we'll get to some of this, and then we can go back and do questions real quick. Before you do that, sorry. This personal ethics statement on the front, I'm a big believer in going on record when it comes to things that are important. I think is an important leadership tool is that you don't veil your viewpoints in just words, that you're actually willing to go on record. Maybe as a group or individually, you might want to start trying to articulate some of these things in writing as you evolve in your leadership role and start to add staff and so forth. There's a lot of different ways to do it. So on the second page, let's talk about the adverse endpoint just real quick. Two examples. One of the most studied ethics example in the engineering profession is the Hyatt Hotel Skywalk collapse, and how it's a complicated story of how the loading, the supports that held up the walkways as these people were watching a dance competition on the main floor did not meet the loads. They were undersized, and it's complicated because and why it's studied is because there were a lot of decisions made, poor decisions made, checks that weren't made, communication that didn't occur. It's really one of those kind of dark, significant stories that get your attention. Okay, and as a professional in the engineering field, I just kind of cringe when I think about it, and how demanding it is when you have a risky situation like a structure or catwalk, what you're asked to do, and how you're supposed to do that well. The other one I just found. If you Google West Virginia University academic fraud scandal or something like that, you will find one of the most kind of mind-boggling stories that I've read recently about a gentleman who falsified their academic records, were put in a very high position at the university without the credentials checked, and I shared it with Pamela, and it's just very, it's hard to believe. I mean, and so there's thousands of these kind of stories that are more significant. They're on the side of the dark side of the band. Okay, let's go to the gray band, which is where we live typically. And why do I call it a gray band? The place is where most people will not know about what you do, and or there are views that will support your actions. You can find people that will support a lot of different things, and at the end of the day, my contention is that there's not a lot of knowledge, perhaps, of what you do. And so this becomes very personal. This becomes very individualistic to your company versus a leader, and then to your company. And as I noted here, the list goes on and on of things that are part of this gray band, but we've kind of alluded to some already. How are you going to treat your staff? How are you going to treat your vendors and your business partners? How are you going to price your products? How are you going to time keep and record effort? That's a really significant one if you're into having to record and pay off of effort. It is amazing what can be done with a few stray hours here and there when no one will ever pick that up. I mean, you think you've got systems in place that's going to check all this, but it's subtle, and that's a significant one. Profit margin establishment, okay? Full disclosure and information transparency to staff and customers. How transparent are you going to be with information? And how are you going to share it so it's understood or not? Staff salaries, promotion of your products. Right? Professing and proving out reliability and quality. You're going to be, if you haven't already, you had to step forward and share your idea. You had to put some degree, or at a low level, but some idea of credibility to that? Okay? How accurate was that? Was there any point that you could say to yourself, well, I said it this way, but it really wasn't quite that way? And again, that's a gray band. Only you'll know. I mean, a lot of this will not be exposed. A lot of it will not be to the public. It's a very personal discussion where most of our lives are lived. So I just stopped, but the list goes on and on. So how do you establish ethical accountability? Like I said, I think you need to go public with your values. You need to define, share, and reinforce. I don't think you want to be weak-kneed when it comes to not telling people what you stand for. We used to not have values at BH. We had a culture that I think over time people understood, but we never put down the values. We never recorded them. So what happens when you don't do that? Misinterpretation. You change your mind one day, somebody else thinks it's this way, somebody else thinks it's that way.
Can you give an example of a couple of your values?
Yeah, they're on the front. Spirit of service, innovation as it relates to technology. We have got to be a company that values creating new ways to do our work. And we talk about these things. I share it in my quarterly presentations. We use it in evaluations. Do we do enough to reinforce our values? No. I think that'll be one of the things I look back on my career and say is that we never did enough with some of this. So I can share that candidly. But that you can read about those. So go on record. Don't be veiled in what people think. Write a personal ethics statement. You can share that with coworkers or other leaders.
Well, how different is that from your mission statement?
They're different, yeah. These are when you think of a hierarchy of what's important, I'll contend that the values are the bedrock. It starts with the values, it goes to vision, mission, core competencies, it stacks from values. If I only did one thing as a leader, if I could only do one thing, and people should hold you accountable and be able to understand how you're going to be held accountable within that context. You can't, I don't think you can't put them side by side. No, values is the floor. Okay, don't ever underestimate the context of the values. So establish a governance structure that reinforces ethical conduct. That's one way to do it. Include ethical conduct in your performance goals. How am I treating the staff? If you've got a board, don't just put out there that we made X number of widgets and made this amount of money. Do a survey of the staff and ask them, am I trustworthy? Do we live by an ethical standard? We have a series of questions on leadership in our survey that have to do with us upholding our values. And it's not 100%. I mean, it's rather convicting to have people candidly share with me and the leadership team how we do. So there's a lot of ways that you can create accountability. Stay around good leaders, form an accountability group. Outside of work probably is helpful. I have a group of guys that I go to ask how I'm doing and are good enough friends that they'll tell me when things are a little bit washed. So this is not, don't go at this alone is what I'm saying. Surround yourself by good examples and try and come up with some sort of group that's really interested in your behavior. And then react quickly to negatives to negative words and actions. You can't let things fester that aren't within the context of your right and wrong and your ethics, your framework. You've got to go at it with a vengeance because it seeps into it starts to seep around and get bigger and bigger, and then it gets out of control, and you've got to be really proactive. If you go to the left of the gray band, the 5 leadership priorities, Paul Ford is a very good friend of mine. He's consulted on leadership around the world. For about the last, well, he's been doing it longer. I've been working with him for the last decade about leadership priorities, what makes effective leadership. I was telling Webb that Paul offered that if you'd like to have us back on to talk about these priorities, he'd be glad to come down and we could dialogue and talk about them. But he's come up with 5 priorities, and I don't have time to go through each one of these, but one of them is the value keeper, the values keeper. You are the keeper of the values in your organization. And this goes to the fact that you're the leader, and it goes to the fact that you're being watched. And this keeping of the values is being watchful, mindful, reflective of what you're doing. And when you think of it as that you're a steward of values, it's a big deal. And there's some richness in the way he's categorized these priorities, and we can talk about that more or come back. Yeah.
Could you just touch on equipping Reed's?
Yeah, that's Paul believes that as a leader's job, you are to equip others to do their job and to release them on to creating their own team, and that you don't hoard and micromanage, and that you train people up, training maybe to replace equipping, but you're willing to let them fly, kick them out of the nest, let them go, let them make mistakes, and I know it's real easy to control and say people aren't ready and never have them be ready, and so that has to do with how you prepare your workforce and your next leadership group and so forth. So some questions. Is ethics one of the key business issues of the 21st century? That was on a billboard at the Denver airport, some business school in Colorado. Ethics is the most important business issue of the 21st century. Believe it or not, that's up to you. What kind of organizational culture do you want to have? How important are ethical values in the workplace? What if your ethical conduct was published or went viral? Would you be concerned? Can you assume that people know the difference between right and wrong? This is a very fundamental question. Some people believe that you're born, your family structure, your school education, all defines that. And when you get to a place, it's defined. I don't think that's the case. I think you really do need to talk with people about within your culture that context of right and wrong. How do you intend to treat people? Are there right and wrong ways to do this? Okay. In what ways do you display that you are a trustworthy person? Do you have the courage to do the right things? Can you alter the trajectory of your legacy? Does the legacy even matter to you? Paul and I get in interesting debates about, whether legacies are what other people say about you, or whether, and to what degree do we have to do with them, in the big picture. I contend that we have a lot to do with them, and I think most of us, if we think out to the end, whenever that is, that we want people saying good things about what we've done. I think that's human nature. I hope that's what we think. Where might you be tempted to sell out? There's so many things on this list that there might be some part of this that you've got to be really watchful of. Early on, just to be candid, I had some real anger issues that out of feeling that I was right or knowing that I was right, I could get angry with people in the context of where it's, people go, ooh, what's wrong with Brian? Okay? I have to be watchful of that each and every day. This is not, I certainly, I think if my staff was here, the leadership team, they would say, well, I haven't seen Brian get angry in a long time. I appreciate that. But that doesn't mean that 25 years ago, I clicked off a switch and just said, hey, I'm not going to be angry anymore. It's something I have to deal with. And so if you think about treating people right and wrong as part of a moral context, where might you be tempted to sell out or not pay attention to or just kind of let it go? How intentional do you plan to be? That goes back to that comment. There are so many others that you could write about, talk about in a group that I would encourage you to do that. I'm going to close and then we'll go to some questions real quick. What would you do? This is one of my favorite Bohannon-Houston moral, ethical dilemmas. It might not be real profound, but it certainly has been for us. You submit a proposal to a customer that has certain staff included. So you're conveying the prowess of your skill set. Prior to the selection of the work, one of these members announces they are leaving the company in several weeks. Do you tell the customer knowing that the selection and contract negotiation will probably take place prior to them leaving? In other words, at the time you get a signed contract, that person is still unemployed.
Well, I've had that happen, and so I did notify the customer.
Good.
Along with the replacement and their background.
Good. Thank you for that good example. Right?
Best way to handle
It's interesting that, again, in the gray band, you will have rousing debates over that particular issue because in the strictest sense of, I guess, the situation, the person hasn't left. They might change their mind. You can conjure up all sorts of things that, oh, you're going to give them more money and they're going to stay. Oh, they're not going to leave. You know, it's not going to happen. I mean, you can, these mind games go on when this could be significant. This could be a lot of money. We were presented with that years ago, and the project manager wasn't leaving for a couple months because he was going to move to Colorado, so it wasn't an adverse departure. And it was a big contract. And people will argue, well, you know, we know the customer really good, so they'll let us replace him. They won't see it as really that significant. They'll understand. I mean, again, great answer, and I appreciate that example. Be candid in the conversations and the different viewpoints, and then have the conviction, like he shared, to do what you think you need to do and move forward. Yes.
Well, I mean, just in the discussion that you ratcheted it up, which can be kind of fun and interesting to do, is you didn't just say it's a key member. You made, in your case, it was the program manager, which maybe is synonymous with key member, where maybe you're thinking it's a software person, but you may know in your industry that we're bidding on this job, and without this program manager, our odds go from 80% will win the job to 20% will win the job. So then what do you do? And then you can make it much more palpable.
Yeah, there's a lot of ways. Like I said, there's a lot of ways to find support for an answer, and it can be on both sides of the fence. That's why the question about how do you do this, it makes sound like a cop-out, but I think it's real. You've got to personalize this and decide yourself how you address a moral and ethical framework within your company. And you'll compare, and I look at businesses and other organizations and I say, well, we certainly do more than they do. And then I'll come across somebody that we're wimpish compared to the way they reinforce some of this stuff. So and in some cases I've gone back and kind of ratcheted things up because I realized that we were getting a little too casual with some of this. And the turnover of employees and new people coming in and bringing in biases, crossing generational divides, is enormous when you think about how to do this in a comprehensive way. But I don't think you can go wrong by personalizing it and trying to be comprehensive. And if you're going to err, do it more than less, because you will benefit by setting that good foundation. So I'll stop there and answer questions if you've got some. Yeah.
Got one for you. A lot of the discussion has been internal, but now, Brian, you're the CEO of your company. What happens when the customer has got a problem with their ethics and you've got the contract to make the customer happy?
Well, that's a great question. There are customers that you do fire because they don't match up. We don't work. In fact, I just came from a conversation where we had a customer on a list that we decided to take off because of some issues with the people there, and also potential conflict with other customers. So we had to make that decision. It's not all in and every dollar is the same. That goes then to how you identify a good customer.
Right.
I think just in kind of a general philosophical sense, you do trend towards working with people that are like-minded. It is not something you want to find yourself looking back on and saying, you know, I really spent way too much time with a bunch of customers that didn't have the same philosophy that we did. So all of our partners, and we've got lots of them that we work with, have similar business mindsets. It's not surprising that a lot of our partners are legacy companies. We look to that as being important, and so we build relationships, and that becomes the context. So I think when it gets really bad, you gotta, if you want to continue it, you've got to address it.
Mm-hmm.
And if there's a point where you can just say we're moving on, you can cut contracts, you can not pursue more work, you can do a lot of things to never cross paths again. And they're probably thinking the same thing. So, yeah.
So if you do surround yourself with like-minded customers and partners, does that raise an issue where you're going to tend to get a lot of supportive views?
Good point. I think there's ways to test that out. I think what we're really talking though is about the moral context and the way they approach their work, and that's in how they treat their partners, what their environment is like, how they pay their sub-consultants and so forth. I think there's a lot of things that you can do to corroborate that yes, it should be a good partnership. Doesn't mean it's always perfect. And yeah, one of the big challenges of leadership is to find some counter voices that won't do anything more than ask good questions. I mean, that's the interesting thing. As I've gone through my career, the longer I go, the less I know, the more I don't have this figured out, the only way to get something done is to ask questions and organize effectively. Because the collaboration, dialogue, the way we now work with teams and everything, it's evolved, and you can't command and control, in my opinion. And so I've broadened your answer some, or question, but I do think that you need to be challenged, but at the same time, I think you go with what matches up. So yeah, I saw a hand here.
Just a follow-up comment. There are a lot of companies that walk away from customers and vendors or suppliers, and they're happy to walk away from the business because they want to, they find them unethical, etc. There is a company that went, the first IT software company called Infosys on Wall Street. That's a very popular, large company. They actually fought this whole corporate ethics thing and corruption and things like that for like 15 years before they became the giant that they are. And they have a lot of stories on how that's one of their branding, is their corporate social responsibility and values are extremely important for the company. and they became very successful.
Yeah, and I think with those kind of examples, and there's many wonderful companies to choose from, but to model yourself after. That's the other thing. I don't have too many original ideas. I've just copied. I mean, I've been around some really great leaders and organizations, and I pick and choose, and then I apply, and it makes sense, and we constantly are trying to evolve to be better, but there's a lot of great examples out there to learn from. Anything else that you wonder about, or did this make sense? Did this maybe get some thoughts going about this subject? Yeah.
Brian, you touched on the importance of communication, particularly as a leader, and I think that's important. I actually have a question, because in technology, and it's very common, particularly as a technology entrepreneur, that you are faced with certain ethical quandaries that could be cataclysmic. I think everyone here who is raising money is going to face this at some point in their entrepreneurial career. What happens when you have a circumstance where you have money that is coming in and does not arrive in time, say from investors or revenue or something like circumstances, and yet there is a chasm there, and you have to inform your staff, the customer, whomever you're responsible for, and yet sometimes those things can be glossed over because if the money arrives in time, everything's okay. If it doesn't, then people's lives are fairly adversely affected. And sometimes, and these are pretty practical concerns in the startup world where those instances arise. I think you mentioned something about communications, but in your experience,
How do you do it? Well, those are great round the table dialogue questions. You know, throw that out. Let's take a situation where we don't have the money to pay people. Okay, throw that out. What would you do? Well, there's some business safety nets that you can consider, and I think that's always what you're trying to think of in terms of protecting against that. Let's say it's not quite that dramatic. Let's say it's like when in 2010 I had to stand up and tell the staff that we were cutting salaries and benefits because our business dropped 10% per year for 5 years from our peak in 2007. And yet our position on this E&R ranking nationally never changed. Contractors, architects, engineers got waylaid for a while. And so did a lot of other people. I'm not saying we were different. It's just that we were having to communicate some tough news after years and years of riding a wave that was never going to end. You know, our projections, I could show you a document that says we should be a $100 million company right now. We had to let some people go, we had to cut salaries, we cut benefits. We had a very generous 10% match on our 401k, one of the best around. We're very proud of that. We are not back to it. We don't believe with everything that we have to do, we can make it pencil out. So we've made what we believe is the right decision, but it impacted and it challenged people, and I don't think that goes to the trust. I don't think you get much out of keeping things secret. You gotta just go with the news. Yes, not everybody's gonna know everything. I'm not the type of person that says we're a company where we're gonna post salaries on the front door like some do. We're not like that, but every quarter I stand up and in fact, next week, the company's going to see the quarterly performance. They're going to see the profit and loss per month. They're going to see the revenue. They're going to see our utilization. They know the numbers. We put it on their the screen. They see it when they log in. I mean, I don't see how you can be trustworthy unless you're willing to trust people to handle what is going on. And one thing to remember. In tough times, people rally around being told what's going on truthfully. they will be inspired, most of them, and those that don't, they'll leave. And you just gotta believe that that's gonna happen. So I think the communication goes to being transparent. I try and model that when I stand up. I always try and say something that is wrong with my leadership, like I did with my anger comment today. Life's too short to go through all this thinking that everybody doesn't know or doesn't talk about the fact that we're flawed individuals, and that's not the part of leadership that you don't have to be perfect. I think you have to know what you stand for, and you got to be willing to share it candidly, and I think that's what builds the trust. So yeah.
I think the employee motivation factor is a big thing. If the leader communicates authentically, like a genuine leader would do, like Simon Sinek would say, it's not just what you do, but why you do it. If you communicate well, then they're part of your vision. And that story, there's a great story actually about Pandora's CEO who did not pay their salaries for employees for 2 years. And he actually had 16 or 18 employees until they raised the round of $35 million or something like that. They were just working for free, and every monthly meeting they were just saying, progress and more progress. And there's one monthly meeting where they actually handed out checks for the past 2 years. So
Great examples, and that's great leadership in my opinion, that you can rally the hearts of people around a cause, and people will typically react well. I know Jim Hinton always would share when we kind of hit the wall, everybody, the team responds and aspires to do well. They will support you if you're willing to build the trust through transparency, which I guess is the message of that. And again, that goes to, well, I don't know what to be transparent about. Well, ask yourself the question: what do I want to share with the staff? What do I believe they should know? And then you go on record, and it evolves over time, and maybe as they do well with it, you give them more information and you build it. It's not, you don't ask a question and get an answer, and that's the way it is for the rest of your career. It evolves. I'm much different as a leader right now than I was 10 years ago, 20 years ago. And if you just accept the fact that it's a learning path, it's a growing path, and it's the intentionality of doing it right that wins the day. So.